Hey, what's up? This is Lore, and welcome to the first of my Starcraft 2 beta journals. This is going to be a bi-weekly series that focuses on the game and just kind of showcases some of the new units and new features, and some of the strategy and such also. Now in this episode I'm going to be showing you the Protoss. This is the race that I've been playing the most in the beta so far, and although a lot of the units are changed or just gone completely, a lot of the old strategies are still intact. So for starters, let's take a look at the Zealot. Not a lot has changed about these guys. They're still the first unit Protoss players get access to, and they're still very strong melee combatants. In StarCraft 2, they can also be upgraded with the Charge ability, which allows them to quickly close in and surround enemies, and makes them a lot more useful in the mid to late game. Next up we have Stalkers. These are a lot like Dragoons. They're great ranged attackers, especially against armored enemies. They can also be upgraded with Blink, which lets them get around the battlefield quicker and also jump up or down cliffs. The Sentry is a brand new unit to the Protoss force with a lot of useful tools. First, they can create force fields that block the movement of ground troops. It can be tough to use, but can quickly block access to your base or prevent enemies from escaping. They can also erect a Guardian Shield around them, which reduces the damage dealt by incoming ranged attacks by 2. Since they also deal a reasonable amount of damage, this makes them very effective against light enemies with fast attacks. Dark Templars are back, and every bit as effective as they were in the original StarCraft for more or less the same reasons. Until your opponent has mobile detectors available, they're extremely deadly out in the open or against small expansions. Note that Zerg Overlords are no longer detectors by default. They have to be morphed into Overseers, which takes a little bit of time and resources to get to. That means Dark Templar can be effective even against a Zerg player. Now, should your opponent manage to get a mobile detector out or you run into a stationary one, a Dark Templar can be merged into Archons. That doesn't take any additional training or resources, so once you've been discovered, you can just turn your Dark Templars into Archons and keep pushing. Any combination of 2 higher Dark Templar will result in the same Archon unit. There's no Dark Archons in StarCraft 2. High Templar also make their return, along with the feedback ability that was originally given to Dark Archons. This ability simply drains all of an enemy's energy and deals 1 point of damage for each point drained, so it's very deadly against enemy casters. Once researched, they can also use their old Psionic Storm ability, which is very deadly against clusters of enemies. This is the Warp Prism. It replaces a shuttle but can also be deployed into phase mode, which basically turns it into a mobile pylon. Aside from providing power to any nearby buildings, it allows you to warp units directly to the Warp Prism from a warp gate. If you were wondering what happened to the Dragoons, well, now they're immortals. They've given up their ability to attack air targets in favor of an incredibly strong attack against armored units. They can do upwards of 50 damage in a single hit to an armored unit. They also have specialized shielding, which means they'll never take more than 10 damage from a single hit as long as their shields are up. The downside, of course, is that they're completely ineffective against air units, and they can be quickly overwhelmed by lots of smaller attackers. For those, we have the Colossus. These guys have an incredibly long-range attack that deals a very large amount of damage to several enemies at once. They can also walk up or down cliffs, which makes them very mobile. Just a handful of Colossi can make quick work of an entire enemy ground force. However, they have no air attack, and in fact are so tall that they can actually be targeted by air-to-air attackers. In the air, the Phoenix replaces both the Scout and Corsair as the Protoss air-to-air fighter. These are incredibly fast and do a respectable amount of damage, especially against light units, but can only attack other air units. They can, however, latch onto most ground enemies with their Graviton Beam, which not only disables the unit, but also floats it up into the air where other Phoenixes can attack it. There's also the Void Ray. These start out doing only minor damage, but the longer a Void Ray focuses its beam, the stronger it gets. This makes them ill-suited against groups of weaker enemies, but very strong against buildings and larger enemies. They're also relatively cheap to produce and can be reached fairly quickly in the tech tree, which makes early Void Rays a pretty popular strategy for Protoss players. Carriers return in StarCraft 2 and haven't really changed too much aside from a couple small nerfs. They still launch interceptors, although the maximum number has been reduced to 8, and they still move fairly slowly. They also seem a little bit easier to kill, especially by air-to-air attacks. Still, they're very effective against buildings and base defenses, and can be guarded by a few phoenixes to ward off enemy air units. Finally, there's the Mothership. These are very powerful air units that can work well in conjunction with just about anything. In fact, they're so powerful that a Protoss player can only have one of them in play at any time. They have a cloaking field similar to the Arbiter from the original Starcraft, although they're much tougher to kill, as well as a couple handy other abilities. Vortex in particular throws a gravity well that sucks any nearby units into it, effectively removing them from the battle for the duration. You have to be careful not to let your own units get trapped by a vortex, and if your force isn't strong enough, you're basically just delaying the inevitable. But it can give you some time to put some serious damage in on the enemy's base in the meanwhile. Also, a carrier's interceptors can get caught in the vortex, so it's not a good idea to use it if you're bringing carriers along. Along with Vortex, the Mothership has an ability called Mass Recall that basically lets you teleport a large group of units to the Mothership's location from anywhere on the map. This lets a Protoss player quickly bring in their ground troops and bypass the rest of the enemy's base defenses. Keep in mind that they'll be cloaked as well when they arrive, which means a helpless enemy Mothership might not be that helpless after all. So, that just about covers the Protoss units in StarCraft 2. The only units I didn't really show are the probes and observers, but nothing's really changed about either of those at all. Be sure to check back in a couple of weeks when I go over one of the other races. In fact, if you feel like it, post a comment on either YouTube or TankSpot telling me which race you'd like to see next. I'll do my best to tally up the votes and show that race off in my next video. Catch you guys later.